Windsor Castle, majestic, regal, timeless. On the surface, it was just another spring weekend in the royal calendar, a private luncheon honoring Queen Camilla's latest charitable patronage. The lawns had been trimmed, the silver polished, and the press, kept at a respectable distance, captured elegant smiles and choreographed entrances. But what no one saw was the quiet storm building inside. Princess Charlotte, usually a burst of energy wrapped in royal etiquette, had spent the morning uncharacteristically subdued. Not rude, not upset, just invisible. She sat still, hands folded, eyes downcast, a child trying to disappear in plain sight. And in a family that thrives on being seen, but never truly known, that silence said more than a headline ever could. To the world, the Princess of Wales stood poised, chatting effortlessly with aides and dignitaries. But behind the grace, Catherine was watching, reading the room like only a mother can. She had noticed the shift in Charlotte, the way her shoulders curled inward, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. Then came the moment, a glance through a corridor, a pale little face walking silently past, lips drawn tight. Charlotte wasn't crying, but she was clearly hurt. Not scraped knee hurt, not scolded by teacher hurt, but something far deeper, emotional bruising wrapped in royal manners. That was the beginning of a confrontation that would never make the official press release, of a tension so sharp it sliced through centuries of silence, of a royal mother who finally decided enough is enough. Because while the world worships crowns, Catherine only cared about protecting one thing, her daughter's voice. Charlotte had never been a quiet child. She was sharp, observant, often delightfully cheeky, the kind of little girl who could command the attention of her older brother George or leave a room in stitches with a clever one-liner whispered under her breath. But not today. Catherine had noticed it at breakfast. Charlotte's spoon barely stirred her porridge. She picked at her fruit. And when Prince Louis made one of his usual silly faces, Charlotte didn't even crack a smile. Her hands stayed folded neatly in her lap, her gaze drifting to the window. The luncheon at Windsor Castle should have felt familiar, safe, surrounded by cousins, aunts, uncles, and grandparents, many of them polished to perfection for another day of royal optics. But Catherine felt it in her chest. Something wasn't right. Charlotte had been seated with the younger royals in an adjoining salon. There was tea, scones, fruit tarts, and small talk, a structured scene meant to feel casual. The adults mingled elsewhere, sipping champagne beneath oil paintings of monarchs long dead. Catherine had kissed Charlotte's forehead before leaving the room, giving her the kind of reassuring glance only mothers know how to give. It wasn't until 45 minutes later that everything changed. Catherine spotted her daughter crossing the corridor alone. There were no tears, no tantrums, just a ghost of a girl moving too quietly, too carefully for someone her age. Her face was pale, her mouth pressed tight, as if holding something in. Catherine excused herself mid-sentence and followed. She found Charlotte standing by a service door, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the stone floor. "What happened, sweetheart?" Catherine asked gently. Charlotte hesitated, then whispered, "Nothing, Mummy." But Catherine wasn't just a royal. She was a mother, and mothers always know when nothing means everything. Catherine crouched down slowly, bringing herself to Charlotte's eye level. Her voice was soft, measured, but there was urgency in her tone now. "Sweetheart, I know when something's wrong. You don't have to pretend with me." Charlotte glanced up briefly as if calculating whether the truth was safe to speak aloud. Then with a small, almost imperceptible shrug, she whispered, "Granny Camilla said I was showing off." Catherine blinked. "When did she say that?" Charlotte hesitated. "When I told Louis the answer to a game. We were playing, and she told me not to speak unless I was spoken to." There it was. Not a public scolding, not an obvious punishment, just a sharp jab disguised as decorum, a backhanded comment delivered with the smile of a queen consort, and directed at a child who had done nothing but play. Catherine wrapped her arms around Charlotte, pulling her close. On the outside, she remained composed. But inside, something broke and something else ignited. This wasn't about jealousy or miscommunication or royal protocols. It was about a grown woman putting out the light of a little girl who simply wanted to belong. Catherine had spent years learning how to dance around Camilla, smiling politely at her outdated views, laughing at comments that were never truly funny, accepting that certain dynamics in the royal household would never feel natural. But she had always hoped, that whatever tension lingered between them would never touch the children. She had been wrong. Later that day, during the formal family stroll through the gardens, Catherine walked slowly beside Charlotte, her presence a quiet shield. Camilla floated ahead, chatting with Charles as if the morning had been without consequence. But Catherine's eyes never left her, because now the game had changed. Charlotte hadn't just been silenced, she'd been targeted, and Catherine, for the first time, stopped pretending she didn't see it. Later that afternoon, the children were ushered into the grand hall for tea, a royal tradition wrapped in silver cutlery and soft harp music. As the adults continued mingling, Charlotte wandered to the refreshment table, her confidence slowly returning. She reached politely for a second scone. Camilla turned. She smiled. That half smile, the one that rarely touched her eyes, and said in a tone that teetered between playful and condescending, "Perhaps one is enough, darling. We wouldn't want to appear greedy." Charlotte froze. Catherine, watching from across the room, caught the exchange. There was no loud tone, no firm scolding. But the message had landed all the same. The room kept moving, conversations flowed, teacups clinked. But a little girl had just been publicly shamed, again, for existing just a bit too much. And Catherine had seen enough. Her mind began racing back, replaying other moments that, until now, had seemed inconsequential. The time Camilla brushed past Charlotte mid-sentence, dismissing her curiosity with a simple, "Let the adults talk, dear." Or the quiet eye roll when Charlotte giggled during a family photo. Or how Camilla once told an aide, not knowing Catherine was near, "She's very confident, isn't she? Almost performative." One moment alone could be forgiven. But strung together, these weren't accidents. They were a pattern. Catherine had been taught, like all royals, to prioritize peace, to rise above petty slights. But now she understood something deeply unsettling. Camilla wasn't simply aloof. She wasn't being traditional. She was trying to shrink Charlotte, not through harshness, but through something colder: dismissal, quiet corrections, constant reminders that her presence was a bit too much, her spirit a bit too loud. And for Catherine, who had spent years finding her own voice in the rigid corridors of the crown, seeing that same struggle imposed on her daughter lit a fuse no protocol could contain. Camilla hadn't just offended her, she had crossed the most sacred line of all. That evening, the grandeur of Windsor faded behind them as the car rolled toward Adelaide Cottage, a quieter, more personal corner of royal life. The staff had dimmed the lights. The children were being readied for bed. And yet, for Catherine, the day hadn't truly ended. Not until she faced the truth. She tucked Charlotte in herself. The little girl was polite, composed. "I'm okay," she said when asked. But her words were practiced, and her eyes, those soft, searching eyes, still held the weight of the day. "You don't have to pretend," Catherine whispered, brushing back a strand of hair. Charlotte nodded slowly. "Granny Camilla doesn't like when I talk too much." The honesty of it, so simple, so matter-of-fact, landed harder than any blow. Catherine didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She simply kissed her daughter's forehead, rose, and walked down the hallway with footsteps that carried the quiet fury of every mother who has ever realized her child has been belittled while no one was looking. William was in the study, finishing a call with his private secretary. When he saw her enter, he paused. "Is she all right?" he asked. "She's trying to be," Catherine replied. She sat, and for the first time she laid it bare. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just with calm precision. She recounted every word, every comment, every look. From the guessing game to the scone, from the garden walk to the salon remarks. The thread that tied it all together was no longer invisible. William listened, leaning forward, his brow tightening with every sentence. "This isn't something we let slide," she said finally. "I agree," he replied, "but we handle it carefully." Catherine nodded, but something had already shifted in her eyes. This wasn't about handling, this was about protecting. Camilla hadn't embarrassed her. She had wounded her daughter, and Catherine would no longer play the part of the perfectly composed royal if it meant watching Charlotte be diminished, one whisper at a time. Highgrove House was supposed to be different. Unlike the sprawling formality of Windsor or the calculated symbolism of Kensington, Highgrove was meant to feel human, cozy, familial. Charles had invited Catherine and William for a small, private dinner. No aids, no speeches, just supper, a fire, and a few hours of warmth. It was his idea of reconnection. But warmth is fragile when tension has gone unspoken too long. Charlotte had come along only to greet her grandfather before bedtime. Dressed in a soft cream cardigan, hair neatly brushed, she walked into the lounge and offered a polite, practiced smile. "Good evening, Granny." Camilla, seated by the fire, barely glanced up. She didn't return the smile. Instead, she said, lightly but unmistakably, "Are you sure you're not too tired to be here?" It landed like a stone on crystal. Everyone in the room heard it. The air thinned, even the fire crackled, a little quieter. Catherine's expression didn't change, but her entire presence shifted. She turned to Charlotte and said gently, "Why don't you say goodnight to Grandpa and head upstairs with Anna?" Charlotte hesitated. She looked up at her mother, unsure. Catherine gave a small nod. The little girl walked to Charles, offered a hug, then left the room in silence. The door clicked shut. Camilla sat back, swirling the wine in her glass. She muttered, almost as an afterthought, "Well, she's very sensitive, isn't she?" William froze. Charles shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing between the two women. And then Catherine stepped forward, not abruptly, not dramatically, just with purpose. Her voice was calm, steady, precise, and "No, she's not too sensitive," she said. "She's a child, and she deserves to be spoken to with kindness." Camilla raised a brow. "I didn't mean it that way. It's hardly something to get upset about." Catherine didn't blink. "It wasn't just tonight. It's been happening for weeks. I've heard what's been said to her, and so has she." Charles opened his mouth, perhaps to mediate, but Catherine cut in. "If it were just one comment, we'd move on. But it's not. It's a pattern. And I won't stand by while my daughter is made to feel less than." Camilla looked to William for rescue, but he didn't move. His silence echoed louder than any speech. "I've tried to keep peace," Catherine continued, "because that's what's expected of me. I've ignored moments that didn't feel right. But this is different. This involves Charlotte, and I won't let anyone, no matter who they are, undermine her confidence." Camilla set her glass down, a bit harder than she meant to. "You're reading too much into this. Children are resilient." Catherine met her gaze. "Children remember how they're spoken to, especially by people who are supposed to protect them." There was no shouting, no royal meltdown, just the quiet, unmovable power of a mother who'd had enough. The days that followed the Highgrove confrontation were quiet, not the usual royal kind of quiet, filled with pleasantries and ceremonial distance, but something else, charged, deliberate, strategic. No one addressed what had happened in that room. No statements, no gossip, no fallout visible to the public eye. But inside the palace, everyone felt it. The first ripple came when Catherine quietly pulled Charlotte from a garden charity event that Camilla had personally organized for the royal grandchildren. The official reason? A mild cold. But among staffers, there were no questions, just knowing nods and whispered confirmations. Catherine was drawing a line, and not just for herself. Then came the school recital at Lambrook, a big moment for Charlotte. Catherine handled the guest list herself. Camilla's name was omitted. The palace press office later said Her Majesty had a scheduling conflict. But behind the scenes, it was clear she had not been invited. Camilla noticed, of course she did. When an aide mentioned it casually over tea, she gave a tight smile and murmured, "Well, perhaps it's better suited to immediate family." But she didn't press the matter, because she knew, and so did everyone else. From that point forward, something in the air had shifted. Camilla still appeared at major events, wreath-laying ceremonies, foundation launches, state receptions, but her proximity to Charlotte had changed. At family gatherings, she sat farther away. She smiled, but her comments were measured. If Charlotte laughed too loudly or reached for a second dessert, Camilla said nothing. not because she suddenly understood, but because she now knew someone was watching, and that someone would not stay silent again. Catherine had spoken once. That was enough. She hadn't launched a media war. She hadn't made palace aides scramble. She had done something far more dangerous within royal walls. She had changed the temperature without raising the heat. And in the House of Windsor, that's how real power moves. Balmoral Castle, a place where the royals shed the weight of duty and slip into wellies and wax jackets. It was Queen Elizabeth's sanctuary, Charles's spiritual retreat, and for one summer, it became Catherine's final test. Everyone arrived in staggered waves. Catherine, William, and their 3 children were among the first, welcomed warmly by Charles himself. The king was all smiles, arms open, visibly delighted to have his grandchildren near. Camilla arrived a day later, her expression unreadable behind sunglasses and a carefully curated weekend wardrobe. The first few days passed in near tranquility. Long walks through heather fields, horseback rides, picnics by the loch. Catherine allowed herself to breathe. Charlotte laughed again, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. She raced George up grassy hills. She helped the staff bake scones in the kitchen. She was returning to herself. And then, it happened. Catherine was in the drawing room with Lady Sarah Chateau and 2 palisades, discussing a minor detail for the upcoming royal tour. William had gone fishing with Charles. The children were playing outside under the supervision of 2 staffers. It was the first time Catherine had let her guard down, even slightly. Then a soft voice broke the rhythm. "I believe Princess Charlotte is in the sunroom, with Her Majesty." Time froze. Catherine's spine stiffened. Her heart didn't race. Her instincts did. She stood, nodded to the room, and walked, briskly but without panic, through the stone corridors toward the sunroom. As she neared, voices filtered through the heavy door. First, Camilla's. "We don't always need to speak over others, Charlotte. It's important to listen. Sometimes your mummy forgets that too." There was no reply. Catherine opened the door. Camilla turned, caught off guard. Charlotte immediately stood and walked toward her mother, saying nothing but pressing close to her side. "I was just having a word," Camilla said with forced lightness. "I heard," Catherine replied, voice neutral. She was only being a child," Catherine cut in gently. "And she doesn't need to be corrected every time she speaks." Camilla's expression hardened. "I've raised children. I know when a girl is growing too fast for her own good." "She's growing just fine," Catherine said calmly, "and she'll do so without being made to feel like a problem." The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was final. "I'd like a bit more kindness around her," Catherine added. "That shouldn't be too much to ask." Camilla said nothing. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. But Catherine didn't care anymore. She had drawn the line, again, and this time there was no misunderstanding. By the end of that summer week at Balmoral, a new order had settled over the castle grounds. There were no official decrees, no protocol changes, but the shift was undeniable. Camilla kept her distance, not in a sulking way, but with measured calculation. At breakfast, she sat farther from the children. During family walks, she lingered near Charles, never once approaching Charlotte. At dinner, she said nothing of posture, portion size, or conversation tone. It was subtle, but in the royal world, subtlety is everything. Catherine hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't staged a palace coup. She had simply drawn a line, one so firm, so rooted in maternal instinct, that it didn't need reinforcement. Everyone understood Charlotte was no longer to be tested. Even Charles, who had once hoped the tension might fade with time, had stopped trying to mediate. He loved both women, deeply. But he also knew Catherine. When she set a boundary, she didn't do so on emotion. She did so with reason and finality. Catherine had not built a wall. She had built a boundary, one that said, "You don't need to like me. You don't even need to agree with me. But you will respect my child." And in a family built on centuries of deference and unwritten hierarchy, that kind of declaration, delivered in silence, was revolutionary. This wasn't rebellion. It was evolution. The quiet kind, led not by a crown, but by a mother's clarity. When the summer ended, the official photographs were released as usual. The royal family lined up on the stone steps of Balmoral, waving gently to the cameras. William and Catherine stood side by side, Charlotte between them, her smile small but sincere. Behind them, Camilla posed gracefully, Charles at her shoulder. The world saw unity, but inside those castle walls, everyone knew a new boundary had been laid. Catherine hadn't needed headlines, or headlines hadn't needed her. She wasn't fighting for attention, nor was she issuing ultimatums. She simply made it clear, without theatrics, without press briefings, that her daughter's well-being was not up for negotiation. She didn't care about optics, she cared about Charlotte. And in that quiet defiance, Catherine did something radical. She chose compassion over compliance. Her role as future queen never wavered, but it no longer came at the expense of her daughter's dignity. There's a particular kind of strength in that, the kind not taught in finishing schools or royal etiquette briefings, the kind you earn from holding a child's hand when they feel small and making sure they never have to feel that way again. Because in the end, Catherine wasn't protecting the crown. She was protecting her child. And perhaps that, above all else, is what will define her legacy. Was this simply a clash of generations? A modern mother raising a daughter to speak her truth, confronted by an older matriarch molded by rules, silence, and stiff upper lips? Or was it something deeper, something far more human? In royal life, tradition is often a shield. It protects the image, the legacy, the family. But what happens when that shield begins to wound the very people it was supposed to shelter? Catherine didn't lash out. She didn't leak secrets. She didn't make Camilla a public enemy. What she did was far more difficult. She stood her ground in private. She chose to protect her daughter's voice in a system that often rewards silence. And that raises the question for all of us. Is kindness optional when you hold power? Or is it, in fact, the truest sign you deserve to hold it at all? Now we want to hear from you. If you were in Catherine's shoes, would you have done the same? Was Camilla simply upholding tradition, or did she cross a line that should never be touched, especially when it comes to a child? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We're reading everyone. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold royal truths. There's another chapter waiting for you. Click the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it.